past December, Moore County in North Carolina dealt with an unexpected power outage. This lapse in electricity didn't stem from equipment failure or severe weather. Rather, the blackout was caused by a shooting attack on two electric substations in the area. This targeted incident crippled the region, leaving around 40,000 residents without power for nearly a week. More than a month later, investigators are still looking for a motive and have not made any arrests yet.
Electricity is the backbone of all other critical infrastructure sectors, right? So without electric, unfortunately, many different things don't run, whether it's water, drinking water, wastewater, other sectors when things like hospitals and schools, even your basic traffic lights.
That's Adrian Lotto, Senior Vice President for Grid Security, Technical, and Operations at the American Public Power Association. Lotto says that although this attack is one of the first to hit mainstream news, there have been other similar assaults to the U.S. power grid over the last decade. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security recently reported that there's been an uptick in the number of threats aimed at electric infrastructure. One incident that some Americans are familiar with is the Metcalf attack in 2013, where gunmen targeted a substation in California owned by the Pacific Gas and Electric Company. This event destroyed 17 electrical transformers and resulted in $15 million worth of damage. To this day, there have been no arrests, but the FBI believes that it was most likely the work of a disgruntled former employee. While this attack was purposeful, Lotto says that many times damage happens due to an accident.
There are outages from time to time. Most of the time, believe it or not, they are unintentional. You could have, for example, a hunter that might just be out in a remote area that happens to fire a weapon in deer hunting season, and it happens to strike a substation. But the major incident that precedes North Carolina was, again, Metcalf. The result of that was regulation.
As a response, the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, or FERC, brought in the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, known as NERC, to create a plan.
There's 6 parts to the NERC-CIP rule that is meant to protect the grid from physical attack. It's a risk-based approach, meaning those critical pieces would have the highest layers of defense around them. And when we talk about physical defenses, we're talking about things like building walls, cameras, infrared detection when people are around to identify whether people are around, even access controls, signage, things of that nature. So the more important under NERC-CIP, the higher the risk, then the rules require more security over a particular asset.
These policies also include securing perimeters around substations, increased security against cyber attacks, as well as the build-out of recovery plans in the event of an outage. However, Lotto says the most recent North Carolina attack may result in even stricter guidelines that better protect national security. After all, lasting power outages can wreak havoc on critical systems like hospitals, police departments, gas stations, and military bases, to name a few. For this reason, grid attacks are considered to be acts of domestic terrorism and are investigated by the FBI and Homeland Security.
I think it's important that police and others take physical attacks on the grid very seriously. So if those individuals are found, that the fullest extent of the law is used so that people understand that this type of attack won't be tolerated in the future, and it is taken seriously by law enforcement. Here at APPA, we continue to advance. We have 2 things for our members that we continue to work with them. One, we have a physical security guide that we've published. So if utilities need some help, some ideas, that's available.
As for what else can be done, Lotto says that communication between substations, law enforcement, and all levels of government is critical to preventing these incidents.
We want to make it really difficult for the bad guys to attack the grid. We want to be ahead of them in understanding if and when they're planning such an attack. If we can get that information again to local law enforcement and the utility itself, that's useful. So I think there's no one lever that is going to be pulled that will prevent this from happening again. But I think it's a collaboration of numerous levers, whether it's physical security happening within the utilities themselves and making sure that's robust, whether it's taking a second look at those NERC regulations, which is currently being reviewed now. That's a potential other lever. And then, as I said, federal and state interagency partnership is the potential third lever.
On a positive note, Lotto believes that the electric sector is resilient and well-versed on this continuing problem. As for what you can do yourself, it doesn't hurt to be over-prepared for a power blackout.
Families should always have sort of what I would call a personal continuity planning, right? A little to-go bag, ready to go, kind of understand what your routes of evacuation are, have a little to-go bag with food, water, things of that nature, ready to go. Have a family plan ahead of time, know where you're going, and make sure that you can get there, as safe and sound as possible. Those are the most important things. And of course, always listen to law enforcement. If they issue a directive, for example, to vacate an area, do so.
To find out more about Adrienne Lotto and the American Public Power Association, visit viewpointsradio.org. To find out more on how to protect yourself and loved ones during a power outage, visit ready.gov. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson. Coming up next week.
35% are at risk for anorexia, 58% are at risk for bulimia, yet there is no standard protocol for how to deal with eating disorders.
Exposing the systems that are failing young female athletes. Then,
there is no universal single time for anyone to know. What time it is going to depend on everybody's individual location and personal history, how they've been moving around.
The intricacies of time. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.